Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.
If you're struggling to lose weight, you've probably heard about weight loss medications like Wegovy or Zepbound, and you might be wondering if they're right for you. Meet PlushCare, a leading telehealth provider with doctors who are there for you day and night to partner with you in your weight loss journey. If you qualify, they can safely prescribe you medication from the comfort of your own home. To get started, visit plushcare.com/weightloss. That's plushcare.com/weightloss. plushcare.com/weightloss.
Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. Today we are doing a care guide episode, which I love. I feel like it's been a second since we've done one, and this plant has been highly asked for. A lot of people have Alocasias and would love to know how to care for them, and as you guys know, I love to dive into their history too. So we're not just learning how to care for this plant, but we're also learning where it came from and how humans have used it throughout time and how it became a houseplant in our homes. So before I get into all of that, I do a giveaway every single episode. So how I choose my winner is I choose someone who has left a review on Apple Podcasts. So if you like to listen there, go ahead and just leave a review. Or if you are listening on Spotify, because those are my two main platforms where I see my listeners listening on. So if you listen on Spotify, there's a little question underneath every single episode. So if you go to the most recent episode and answer the little question underneath, they're usually just for fun questions, then you are entered into the giveaway. Right now I am giving away a free plant to each of my winners. And my usual free plant sponsor is taking a break, so I am currently sponsoring it. So if you want to win a free plant from me, then go ahead and answer the question on Spotify or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. So for our winners today, let's start with Spotify. I asked you guys, what is your unpopular houseplant opinion? Because that is what we talked about last episode. There were a lot of fun ones in here. Some of you do have some strong opinions, and it was pretty fun to read those. So thank you to everyone who responded. Our winner today is McKenna Avery, and she said that her unpopular houseplant opinion is growing plants in a jar without drainage. Girl, I don't know if that's unpopular. That's just going against common sense if you're growing your plants in jars without drainage. I guess it's just risky, right? It's just risky. So McKenna, if that was you, if you could email me at tennyplants@gmail.com, TENNEY plants@gmail.com, I will get you set up with your free plant. And then moving over to Apple Podcasts, the review that I have chosen to be the winner for this week's episode is Michelle Dryson. She said, I love plants. I recently started building my plant collection, which is proving to be slightly difficult with my low light conditions. I just found this podcast, and so far, after 3 episodes, I love it. She has such great advice and ideas. Thank you, Michelle, for that lovely review. If you could email me at tennyplants@gmail.com, I will get you set up with your free plant as well. And again, if you want to win on next episode, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, answer the question on Spotify. It's really as simple as that, and you can pick out a new plant for your house. And I don't know, I think it's kind of fun. So let's go ahead and dive into this week's episode all about Alocasias. And as I'm saying that, I'm also wondering if I am saying this plant name right. I will be honest with you guys, before these episodes, I do make sure I am hopefully saying them right, because there have been occasions where I have been making it up my whole life, and I am tremendously incorrect. So it happens. For example, this isn't a houseplant, but you know the flower anemones? I thought they were anemones for the longest time, and that's in the ocean. I don't know what I was doing. I think it's just counterintuitive to say anemone. Anyway, so I always have to check. I'm very self-conscious about that. But I think Alocasias, you can say it that way or Alocasia. I've heard both. Google says Alocasia. I will try and stick with that because I feel like that's generally pretty accurate. All right, so an Alocasia, it is a tropical plant. It has very large leaves. They kind of have heart-shaped leaves, or some people think they resemble elephant ears, earning one of its most common nicknames, which is elephant ears. But there are also different Alocasias known as African mass, giant taro. So Alocasias, they are from the arum family. That includes other plants like your monsteras. And the Alocasia genus is either rhizomaceous, where their roots are rhizomes, meaning they have underground stems, or they are tuberous, which are things like, a common potato. So they come in both those growing types. They are a flowering plant, though they will rarely flower indoors. Interestingly, some species do have the ability. I just thought this was cool. So they can heat the flowering spadix. And the spadix is just that, how would you describe it? It kind of looks like your pinky finger, and it's surrounded by a specialized colored leaf. It's the same thing as like a peace lily flower. So that spadix, that pinky finger looking thing, it can heat that as the pollen is getting ready for fertilization. And this is done to really increase the aroma around the plant and attract more pollinating insects, just so that it can increase its level of fertilization. I thought that was so cool that it can do that. Unfortunately, like I said, it doesn't often flower indoors, but if you see them outdoors, they are very common in tropical areas. I'm pretty sure they are all over Florida. But yeah, those flowering spadix will heat up to increase its smell. And before we get in too deep, Alocasias are commonly mixed up with Colocasias. They look so similar. They have similar growing habits, but there are some differences. So in general, this isn't always the case, but this is most often the case. Alocasias have upward-facing leaves, while Colocasias have downward-facing leaves. So the bottom of the leaf will be pointing down towards the floor. Alocasias are usually shiny with a thick, waxy, glossy texture, while your Colocasias have more of a matte finish to them, and they usually have a slightly rougher texture to their leaves. And you may be wondering, well, why does this even matter? Why do I need to know the difference between these two very similar plants? This is why it matters. Alocasias don't need as much full sun as Colocasias in general. Colocasias do great with plenty of water. They can even grow hydroponically in straight water, while Alocasias don't really love as much water as their Colocasia friends. Another differentiation is that Colocasias like compost-rich soil, while Alocasias prefer a well-draining soil. So there's some slight differences in their care. So that's why I wanted to include that. If you're wondering which one you have, using a plant identification app is always a good way to go about it. Use a Reddit forum when you can post and ask other people. You can message me. I identify plants all the time for my friends and family. It doesn't bug me at all. But just so you know, there are some slight differences in their care, and they will keep popping up in this episode, those Colocasias. But going back to Alocasias, I want to talk about what they symbolize. So Alocasia means the tree that grows up to the heavens. And the reason why is because the Alocasia is commonly tied to the story of the fairy tale Jack and the Beanstalk, especially for the Western and Eastern versions of the story. When the plant is described, it is usually either drawn out or written out as an Alocasia plant. So when it comes to their symbolism, it's very closely tied to that story. So they symbolize seizing opportunity even when it's risky, like Jack did with the beanstalk. I feel like this could be a really cute symbolic gift if you know someone that's starting a new job. that's risky and maybe they're nervous, excited for it, I feel like this could be a cute gift for that. You'd have to share with them the symbolism though, because I don't think that's common knowledge. I think it would be so cute if plant symbolism was common knowledge, but unfortunately we have too many things on our mind and too many things to remember besides plant symbolism. All right, moving on. Where does the Alocasia originate? So there are around 90 accepted species of Alocasia, and many of these are native to tropical and subtropical Asia, including like India, Malaysia, the Philippines, and also parts of Eastern Australia. They are kind of all over in that region, and they vary greatly in the way they grow and how they look. So let's get into the Alocasia's history. This is always my favorite part, and the Alocasia does have some really interesting bits to its story. So the Alocasia's ancestor plant, it has been cultivated for a long time, and it has been cultivated for food. I should have said that. I don't think it's a surprise, though. If a plant is being cultivated anciently, it's usually for food. So for about 28,000 years, this plant has been grown. The decorative versions that you have in your house today, though, they have been bred specifically for their leaf shape or for their variegation, the veining, and they are not usually edible. So just so you know, don't try and dig yours up and start eating it, because this plant has changed a lot. So this was very common like in Southeast Asia. The tubers of the Alocasia macrorhizos, or the giant taro plant, they were a dietary staple. And this was after thorough cooking. I tried to look into if anyone eats Alocasias today. I saw a post, it was posted way back in 2008. Someone in Ecuador was asking if they could eat their Alocasia tubers growing outside. They were trying to save money, and many people said yes, but I can't confirm it's a safe endeavor, because as that comment thread went on, it turns out what they thought was an Alocasia was a different plant. So the people who are saying, oh, I've eaten that before, I don't know if they thought it was an Alocasia and it really wasn't. So in general, probably don't eat them just because they have changed throughout time and they are generally not eaten today. But going back to their close counterparts, the Colocasia, that is actually still a major crop in Hawaii for their edible tubers, which we call taro. So taro root is still used today. I looked up recipes. There are so many. They can be boiled, baked, fried, sautéed, steamed, roasted, basically anything you can do to cook them. And they're used in both savory and sweet dishes alike. Some of the recipes even recommend using gloves when you are cutting up taro root, because it can be slightly irritating to skin depending on who you are. Some people it bugs more than others. And this is why, because the Alocasia and Colocasia too, they contain raffined crystals of calcium oxalate along with other irritants. But calcium oxalate, those crystals make up things like kidney stones, gallstones. So very painful. They cause numbness and swelling of the tongue and throat, and they can irritate your skin as well. So that is why the Alocasia is not really used today in cooking, though anciently its ancestor plant was. So a lot of Alocasias were, I don't want to say discovered because they've always been there and natives knew about them, but they were formally documented and classified throughout the 1800s as different explorers and different botanists came through remote regions of Asia. They were able to find these plants and document them. Eventually, they made their way into the houseplant world, and they were very popular, specifically in the 1950s. They kind of dominated the houseplant scene, and they've kind of continued in their popularity today, especially because there is such a variety of them. In fact, there is a hybrid, and this hybrid is super, super common, maybe one of the most common Alocasias out there, but it's the Alocasia X amazonica, or African mask. And it received the RHS's Award of Garden Merit. The RHS is the Royal Horticultural Society in England, but it has kind of an interesting history that I wanted to talk about just briefly, because I thought it was kind of bizarre, but kind of cool. So the name Alocasia X amazonica, in terms of like how it was found and if this is even proper naming or nomenclature, it's kind of a mystery. So some experts today consider Alocasia X amazonica to be a manufactured horticultural name instead of a legitimate scientific name, because amazonica usually suggests that the plant is native to an area like the Amazon River in Brazil, but there is no species of Alocasia that is native to South America, so it doesn't really fit. And some authorities currently believe that the Alocasia X amazonica is simply a name that was applied in the 1950s by a man named Salvador Mauro, and this was a hybrid that he created at his Florida nursery in Miami, and it was known as Amazon Nursery. So he kind of just named it after his nursery. He never published or registered this hybrid name, however, so it was just by word of mouth that this name became commonplace. And as of 2009, it is no longer recognized by the taxonomic authorities as a valid botanical name. So for sure, you can use this name, and nurseries can use this name. It's not a problem, but the taxonomic authorities who are out there, I don't know who these people are, but they don't recognize this plant by that name because it is not a legitimate plant name. Interesting, right? I thought so. That's why I included it in this episode. But anyways, as of now, in the 20th century, breeders and collectors have crossed different Alocasia species to create really new and unique varieties. There are some out there that are pretty rare, and they are still very popular in the house plant world. And for good reason too. I think they are such a beautiful plant. I got one of the really basic ones, and I think that was a mistake. I think I need to get a more exciting one, such as the Alocasia amazonica. All right, let's move into how to care for this plant. We've learned about where it came from, what it can symbolize, and a little bit about its close cousin, the Calocasia. But let's talk about how to care for an Alocasia plant if you have one. So, starting with how to water it. You want to water when the soil feels slightly dry. They're actually pretty heavy drinkers. I don't know if any of you can relate to that. I hope not. I don't know. So if you give them too little or too much, it can cause yellowing leaves, especially so of giving them too little though, because they can dry out very fast due to them needing a lot of water. And they are a little bit picky on what kind of water you give them. So if you can, use distilled water, filtered water, or rainwater. That is what they love. Hard water can cause them to get those crispy leaf edges because of those excess minerals and salts in hard water. Alocasias also really appreciate humidity. So if you have a well-lit bathroom, perfect. It will love that. Not enough humidity can cause, again, those crispy leaf edges. And if you want to supply extra humidity to them, I would suggest using a humidifier or grouping them together with a collection of plants so that they can kind of feed off of each other's transpiration, that water that they're releasing into the air. That can be helpful. Or if you keep them in an enclosed container, that can also raise humidity. And I mentioned that overwatering can cause yellow leaves, but it can also, if it progresses, cause the plant to wilt. This is because of root rot. Those microbes in the soil will take advantage of a really wet environment, grow like crazy, attack the roots, and your plant will die. If this happens, you can remedy it. You can pull your Alocasia out, remove that soil, look at the roots. If you see any that are black and mushy, you can cut them off. Keep any that are healthy. They will be more white and firm. So keep those and repot it and really watch your watering. And sometimes you can save a plant from its root rot. Moving on to lighting needs. So depending on what type of Alocasia you have, they can have different preferences for sunlight exposure. So I would say look your Alocasia up for exactly what type you have and make sure that you're giving it the sunlight it needs. In general, the larger varieties can usually handle more direct sun. It can help their leaf color be more defined, whereas the smaller varieties don't need as much as that direct sun. And speaking of direct sun, too much direct sun can cause leaf scorch, and leaf scorch is just, brown patches on a leaf. So if you notice this, move it to a more shaded spot. In general, try to place your alocasia in filtered sun, indirect sunlight, whatever you want to call it, just somewhere where it is not getting too much direct sunlight, but it's also not in a super dark spot in your home. In general, they prefer temperatures between 65 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 to 21 degrees Celsius year-round. That's really not a big range of temperature. They kind of just like it in the middle. So avoid placing them by heating units or AC units because they really do just like a steady temperature, hence the reason why they do well in those really tropical places. And actually, some alocasias do go semi-dormant in the winter. They can have some of their growth die back. Sometimes all of the growth will die back, and it will eventually come back in spring. This can be more common for the tuberous varieties because they store a lot of energy in those tubers or those potato-like roots. So that energy is stored in there, and when spring comes again, it's warmer, there's more sun, they will send out more leaves. So if you're worried about your alocasia and if it's dead, give it to at least spring and see what happens. They can be placed outside in warmer months. If you do live in an area with, warm weather year-round, you can plant them outside. And tuberous varieties do really well when placed outside. Just be aware that windy conditions can tear the leaves because they are so large. So just watch for that. And if you are trying to actually plant them outside, you have a tuberous variety, you live in a tropical location, and you want to stick it outside, just be aware that some alocasias are considered invasive, especially along the Gulf Coast of the U.S. So just check before planting them outdoors, just so you don't get in trouble. And also, when you do put them outdoors, they are more likely to flower, like we talked about earlier. Moving on to fertilizing them, using just a general balanced fertilizer is great. Something like a 20-20-20 mix. Those numbers are simply the percentage of active ingredients for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, in that order. That's what those numbers are telling you. So if you get one, look for that 20-20-20, and your alocasia will do great with that. And during its growing season, that is its best time to fertilize. For a lot of people, that is the spring and summer months, but it just depends on where you live. And just as they are known to be heavy drinkers, they are also heavy feeders, especially the larger alocasias. So just be aware that using fertilizer once or twice a month during those growing seasons is recommended. You don't really need to fertilize during its dormant stage. Don't worry about it too much. Just fertilize during its growing season. Moving on to how to repot one and what kind of soil it likes. You want to repot in spring if there are roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. This usually falls about maybe every 18 months to 2 years, just depending on your situation. And the reason why most people suggest repotting in spring is because that's usually the start of a lot of new growth for houseplants, because there are extended hours of sunlight in the day and they are growing more. So if spring isn't the time that your plants do that, just do it right before the growing season so that they can bounce back easier after you've repotted them. And alocasias, they do prefer a well-draining potting mix, not something super rich. I think when I bought one, I feel like it had a lot of orchid bark in it. So a mix that is just a little bit on the chunkier side. Moving on to pruning, you want to remove damaged leaves, leaves that are dying or have dead foliage, so that all the nutrients and water and energy that your plant is taking up, it will be sent to healthy foliage. And just remember that old leaves die naturally on the alocasia. It's not something to really be worried about, it's just its natural process. So if you lose one of its larger leaves that's older, don't sweat it. It's normal. And again, pruning when it's in its active growing season does allow it to bounce back easier. Some people even recommend using gloves when you prune, just because the sap is toxic and can irritate your skin. Just how some people suggested wearing gloves when handling taro root. When it comes to propagation, these plants are actually really easy. Well, I guess depending on which way you choose, but The easiest way and the most common way is to propagate them by division. So when dividing, you are simply digging up the plant and you are gently separating it. If it is a rhizomaceous variety, you'll be cutting through the underground stems and then separating them and putting them in a moist potting mix. And then if it is a tuberous variety, those come apart a little bit easier, and a lot of times you will see, people call them pups, growing alongside a larger plant, and you can just gently separate those and again repot them into a moist potting mix. You can propagate Alocasias by seed. You simply sow the seeds in shallowly in a moist potting mix, and you keep it damp until they sprout. Just as a note, it can take years for seedlings to develop into a full-size plant, so patience is key for this method, and it's definitely not the most common method. And for greenhouses and nurseries, micropropagation is probably the most common method for them, just because you need very little plant material to do this, so it's very cost-effective for them, and they have all the right growing conditions to allow these micropropagations to take off. But as far as like the average houseplant owner, division is the most common and easiest way for you to get more plants from your one Alocasia. All right, I have 3 more little questions I want to talk about. So the first one is, are they prone to any pests? And yes, they are. Scale, mealybug, spider mites, all 3 of those are pretty common for them. And I would say spider mites are probably the most common, unfortunately. Like I mentioned earlier, I had an Alocasia. Had one. It had spider mites, and it just drove me up the wall because I could not get rid of them. So a friend ended up taking it. But gosh, I guess there's just a lot of places that the spider mites could hide. I really did try everything. Buying houseplants from big box stores, I feel like it's a very common problem to come home with spider mites. So I wasn't really surprised, but it was unfortunate that I could not get them under control. So if you buy one, just check. If you see like the webbing going on, or if you see tiny spider-like little insects crawling around, just skip it. Word from someone who's been on the other side of it, just skip it and find a healthier one. All right, my second to last thing is just some extra care tips. So the first one is to clean the leaves regularly. Since they are rather large, they can easily gather dust, and so you want to wipe them down so that they are clean and can fully benefit from the sun and have photosynthesis just fully occur. No dust getting in the way. And the other note is that, and we've kind of covered this, but they are toxic. So just be careful around children and pets that they are not eating this plant or getting the sap on themselves. And my last question that I want to cover, this one's super short and sweet, is how long do they live? And if you take care of your plant, if you are regularly repotting it and dividing it, it can last for many, many decades. It all obviously just kind of depends on you and how you care for it. And hopefully, with this episode, it won't be a problem in caring for it, and it can last you many decades. And that concludes my care guide for the Alocasia. Thank you so much for being here and listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. And I also hope that you will be back in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of the Plant School podcast. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. Or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode. And you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School podcast.